So just a little bit of history and context. The Wildfire Resilience Index is a project that we've been working on for the past 2.5 years. We've been on it out of our home institution here, which is NCEAS, or the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis. And today I just want to share a little bit about, what the index is, why we built it, what problems we're hoping to address, um, and do just a little bit of a demo of what the index looks like. I'm also hoping, I think I'll wrap up the presentation side of things in 30 minutes or less. I'm hoping that this can be a little bit interactive and we can get some feedback from you, and field any questions or thoughts that you might have, and really start to dig into, the use cases for this type of tool. So my name is Kat Fong. I'm the project manager and lead scientist for the index. All right, so as you all are probably acutely aware working in the wildfire space, wildfire is what we often call a wicked problem. And that's not that wildfire is, evil or wicked itself. It's that it's a really challenging problem that doesn't have simple solutions, right? The solution space is very complicated. There are lots of different actors in the wildfire landscape that all want slightly different things and don't necessarily have alignment across the different values that they have. And so wildfire is what we often call a wicked problem, in that it lacks a singular clear solution. There's often unforeseen outcomes. Managing wildfire often involves behavioral changes of people. Wildfire is multifaceted and interdependent, and it's operationally complex to manage. And so all of these aspects come together to make wildfire a wicked problem. And because wildfire impacts so many different parts of our landscape, there's a need for approaches that integrate information across multiple dimensions in order to create a more holistic understanding of what wildfire resilience looks like. And I'm seeing that my co-lead Ben has just popped on, and I'm happy to hand over the reins if he is here.
I am here. Hi, Kat. Hi, everyone. Sorry for the late arrival. Like many, I was having troubles with technology and getting the link to work for me. So, as Kat has said, well, she had said, I'm the director at NCEAS, and with partnership with her, I've been helping lead this project. And as she has just laid out, well, we have a wicked problem of figuring out how to understand and measure and manage for wildfire in a landscape that has multiple issues, multiple values, multiple contexts that set the management strategies and the goals that we're trying to achieve. And historically, this has been done in an understandable but piecemeal manner of trying to get at different pieces of that bigger picture of how all the parts fit together. So quite obviously, one of the main things that people think about is the risk of wildfire. So trying to model and map where wildfire is likely to happen and how severe it will be and how far outside the range of normal that wildfire might be. So here's an example at the county level of mapping where we see wildfire risk across the United States. That's one way. Another way of thinking about it is from the social side of human communities and how vulnerable they might be to various kinds of disasters. So this could be hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, but also wildfires. And this is usually tied to variables that are about socioeconomic status and whether you have the social, economic, cultural, community resources to support dealing with disaster or hardship when it happens. So it's kind of the social, cultural, and economic infrastructure that would support communities. So there's ways of cataloging those indicators and measuring them, and in this case, mapping them again at the county level. And then on the ecological side, there's been various efforts. This is one example of understanding the risk to the things that we care about. So this is, in this case, imperiled species. So across the landscape, where are different species and how what's their conservation status, and then how well they're being protected in case of national parks or other protection zones, to help manage them. This is not specific to wildfire in this case, but it would give you kind of a sense of an asset, quote unquote, in this case, species that are on the landscape and what their potential, vulnerability or at risk to wildfire were to happen. But again, it's not tailored to wildfire. It's understanding their conservation status. So you got these different pieces. None of them really fill that gap of measuring and managing and understanding all those pieces together to tell us what is the landscape of resilience or vulnerability to wildfire for the many things that we care about across social, cultural, economic, and ecological variables. And that was what really motivated us to try to build this wildfire resilience index, and we launched it last week. And I'm going to hand it back over to Kat, and she's going to dive into some of the details, and then, like she said at the end, open it up for questions and kind of see where you'd like to drive the ship to understand what's under the hood. So take it away, Kat.
Great, thank you. So the first thing that I want to establish before I start digging into the weeds of the Wildfire Resilience Index is how we think about resilience, because this shapes how we constructed the index, and it might be a little bit different than how you've seen resilience framed in other assessments. So we split resilience into two components: resistance, which is the capacity to withstand fire or the negative consequences of fire, and recovery or recovery potential, which is the capacity to bounce back or recover after a wildfire event. And we keep these two components separate throughout our calculation of the index, not just as a conceptual distinction at the very end, but all the way down to the indicator level. Our indicators are partitioned into resistance and recovery to better capture resilience. And the reason that we do this is because resistance and recovery capture different approaches to building resilience. So if you have a place that scores really well on recovery, but has a really poor resistance score, what you have is a place that can rebuild after a fire happens, but a place that's also absorbing more damage that it needs to in the first place. And so a place that has high recovery but low resistance is a place where you might choose to invest in mitigation and efforts pre-fire. And on the flip side, if you have a place that has really strong resistance but weak recovery, you have a place that might be able to withstand the actual event. But if some capacities or thresholds are reached or surpassed, you have a place that might need significant post-fire support for recovery. And so by partitioning resilience into these two components, we can identify where different strategies and interventions are most effective in a way that you can't if you just collapse resilience into a single score. And so this is really the focal point and the advancement, I think, of this particular resilience index is that we partition it mechanistically into these different components. And so we measure each of those components across the 8 social ecological domains that comprise the index. And these are infrastructure, communities, livelihood, sense of place, species, habitat, water, and air. And we identified these different domains through long conversations with subject matter experts to identify the things that people really care about in the landscape, the values that they hold, and the things that they care about that might be impacted by fire. And these are quite diverse domains and they span a lot of what we value on the landscape. And that's an intentional choice, right? Wildfire touches so many different parts of our landscape. And a fire moving through a landscape can impact infrastructure, air quality, species, habitats, and people's livelihoods all at the same time. And so the capacity of a place to withstand and recover from a fire is shaped by all of those systems simultaneously. We need information across all of these different domains to understand what's happening on the landscape. So our framework looks not only, as Ben said, at the ecological side of things and the social side of things, it looks at these things holistically and provides a score across these, a single score that captures all of these different dimensions. And so what that means practically is that you can have a place, you can have two places that on paper look the same. They have the same fire hazard and the same demographics, but they can have wildly different resilience profiles depending on what domains are performing well and what domains are performing more poorly. And so it provides a deeper insight into what's driving resilience on the landscape. And so I'm not going to walk you through all of these. This is just a gallery that's meant to represent some of the indicators that are incorporated into the index. And what I hope you take away from this diverse set of images is the breadth of information that we're drawing on. So we have nearly 100 publicly available data sets that we incorporate into the index. And these data sets are very diverse. It spans things from satellite imagery, species range maps, census records, building codes, air quality monitoring, hydrological data. It's a huge diversity of data that we're able to harmonize and roll up into this index. And I do want to highlight that all of our decisions are documented, they're on the website. All of our data is free, publicly downloadable. There's no black box in any of this. Every decision that we've made and every piece of data that we've incorporated is understandable and transparent and accessible. And so, a little bit on the process slide. This slide is just a visual representation of how all of the different pieces of the index came together. So on the left-hand side, we have all of the raw data input that feeds into the domain level pipelines. This isn't all of the data that we use, this is just some examples. So this data gets fed into these domain specific pipelines where indicators are assigned as resistance or recovery and then normalized so that they're comparable. These 8 different domains are then aggregated into a single composite score. It's the average of those 8 domains. Scores are between 0 and 100. And we provide that information at 90-meter resolution, which is about the size of a football field, so quite fine resolution. Um, the particular iteration of the index that's available online right now is for the 2024 period. We do anticipate updating the index and providing scores for every year moving into the future. From this composite score, we've created a handful of ways for people to access and interact with this project or with this index. The first is the WRI website, which I hope you all have seen, where we have a dashboard where you can explore scores across a range of different geographies. The second way that you can interact with the data is we've put all of the data online, all of the indicators, all of the domain scores, everything, in a format that's fairly easy to download and work with locally. Third, we're in the process of developing an R package, should be done by the end of the week, where users can directly interact with the data in the index in that way for those that are a little bit more on the data science side of things. And then finally, we wrote a script that's available where you can query any geography and get a automatic report so you can feed in your area of interest and extract domain scores and indicator scores. All right, so that's getting a lot of the process out of the way. I'm going to share a little bit of what the index looks like and how to start thinking about it. So the left-hand side is just a screenshot of the dashboard online. The right-hand side is the average WRI score for North America. And so for the year 2024, the average score was 73 out of 100. And I want to highlight that this average score is a starting point, right? It includes a lot of information from all of those different domains and indicators that I think it's really useful to unpack. The other thing that I want to point out is that an average score of 73 has a lot of variation just sort of averaged out within that, right? So if you look at this map, you can see that there's a wide range of scores across the landscape. So we see low scores in interior Alaska and some of our rural communities throughout the West, We see high scores in some remote areas, some areas with a lot of protection. And we see pretty high scores in wealthier areas, which reflects the sort of institutional and structural benefits of wealth. All right. And so now moving on to what you can do with the tool. There's a few use cases that we think are immediately useful to people who are just starting to use the tool. And there's some points where we would really like feedback for how you might use this index in your community and in your context. So we think that this tool is useful for landscape treatment prioritization. And the idea here is that where resistance is low and fire hazard is high, that identifies areas where pre-fire investment is the most urgent. And so the WRI is designed to work alongside hazard maps. It doesn't replace them, right? This isn't a risk map. It doesn't show you where fire is likely to happen. It shows you where what the consequences of a fire will be. So pairing the index with hazard information provides deeper insight into where mitigation, pre-fire mitigation would be most effective. We also think that the index can be used for post-fire resource allocation. So when you look at the WRI map, if you start to identify areas with low recovery scores, those are the communities that are least equipped to rebound on their own, both human and natural communities. And so these are areas that might need technical assistance to navigate disaster programs and rebuilding efforts, or places where you might need to do active restoration or tree planting or things like that in order for those communities to recover. And so the WRI gives a defensible and data-driven way to direct these limited resources towards the communities where they're most needed and not necessarily the communities that are just the loudest. We also think the WRI is useful for cross-boundary coordination. Because we're using a consistent framework across every geography, you can compare jurisdictions and land tenures that usually don't have a common baseline. And that's really useful for these cross-boundary planning conversations where you have an idea of what you want and what's valuable in your place or in the area that you manage, but you don't necessarily have shared data infrastructure across those different places. And then the last case that we think this tool might be very useful, but we're very keen to hear feedback on, is CWPP planning, so Community Wildfire Protection Plan Program Planning. Um, this is an area that we're really interested in exploring with partners, determining whether or not this index can be used for CWPP planning. CWPP planning can be really expensive, and the types of communities that have CWPPs tend to be wealthier, and a lot of that has to do with barriers to access to data infrastructure and the planning tools that are needed. And so we think that the domain structure that we've created and the index can map onto the criteria for developing CWPPs in a meaningful way, but we're keen to find partners and practitioners who are in the process of developing CWPPs so we can see how our tool can dovetail with those needs. I also want to spend a little bit of time highlighting the things that we don't know before we dig into and I share the tool with you. I just want to get these up front and clear so that you don't have to ask the question at the end. So the first is that the WRI right now is a snapshot for 2024. We anticipate releasing annual updates, but this is, a work in process. We just released the 2024 data set, so there's going to be a little bit of a lag before we can do a 2025 data set. But we do anticipate releases on an annual cadence. There's also a handful of data gaps that we document on the website that I think are really important to people who are more boots on the ground practitioners. So a good example of this is we have building codes in our index, but those building codes are at a state level. And so we miss local ordinances that are often stricter. So there are some data gaps and there are some things that we don't know. But we are fully transparent about what those are on the website. I encourage you to dig in. If you think there's anything that we're massively missing, this is a really good opportunity to start a conversation so that we can think through where we can improve, right? Because the goal is for this to be a living tool, and we are constantly seeking ways to incorporate best science and practices. Okay, with that, let's take a look at the actual tool. I'm hopeful that many of you guys have visited our website because I think you may have had to register for this webinar. Um, but if you haven't, the quickest way to get to the dashboard, there's all sorts of information up here that you should read through, but the quickest way to get to the dashboard is to click on the Explore the Index or Explore the Dashboard button. And so what we have here is we have the Wildfire Resilience Index score aggregated or calculated for a handful of geographies that we think are interesting to end users. We have census tracts and subdivisions, counties or divisions, congressional districts or ridings, and then states or provinces. The slash is just the different naming convention for the US versus Canada. And so you can click across these and you can see scores at these different levels of geographic resolution. And then on the right-hand panel, we have all of our different indicators, and you can open up, or each our domains, and you can open up each domain and you can dig in further to the different indicators that you might be interested in. And so as you click through, you can see places that score well and places that score poorly across all of these different domains and all the different indicators. You can then click on your favorite geography, which for me is always going to be Santa Barbara because that is where I live. And you can get a better understanding of wildfire resilience in your specific place. So if you click on one of these things, what pops out is your overall resilience score over here on the right, and then the score of this of the overall index as well as the indicator layer that you've selected. And you can highlight these and get a better sense of what is driving resilience in your area. And I like to show Santa Barbara because I think that it highlights one thing I do want to mention, and that's that not every domain is scored in every place. So this is Isla Vista, this is the college community here in this county, and it doesn't get a natural habitat score or a habitat score, for example, because this is a very dense urban setting. It's fully a built environment. And so not every domain is scored in every place, which I think is worth mentioning before you start clicking through. And so with that, as promised, um, we're about 30 minutes in. That wraps up what we have to present. We would love you guys to use the tool. We'd love to hear any feedback that you have. If you are testing it for a specific use case, that is something that we would very dearly love to know. So with that, I think we can